former FBI staff operations specialist. He is on our Empower account. And there's Garrett. So let's get Garrett added as a speaker as well. All right, Garrett, you've got that invite there. All right. Can you hear us okay, Garrett?
Yeah, I can hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you sound
Loud and clear.
so professional, like you have a great podcasting setup in front of you or something.
I'm getting there. I'm getting there. You know, this life with all the extra time I have these days.
Marcus, let's make sure we're able to hear you all right.
Yeah, I got you guys loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
All right.
Yes, excellent.
All right,
Good deal.
fantastic. I'll also recognize on here, so Randy Schoenberg is tuned in, and Randy's wife, Monica, is a whistleblower that we've filed on behalf of. And if you have questions as we go along or want to chime in, feel free, Randy. Happy to recognize you, to add you for that. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. This has been a busy week for Empower in a lot of ways. A lot of our attention has been focused on our IRS defamation lawsuit for the IRS whistleblowers, but we're also getting ready for a hearing next Wednesday where I will testify alongside Marcus and the Inspector General of the Justice Department, Michael Horowitz. And some of you may have watched a year ago and some change, maybe a year and 3 months ago, when Marcus and Garrett and Steve Friend and I all testified. It was one of the first hearings of the Weaponization Committee of the House Judiciary Committee, and it got a lot of
Boy, a
attention.
lot of stuff has happened since then, huh?
Yeah, no kidding. So we've learned an awful lot, and of course there've been a lot of developments as well. Some bad, lots of bad actually, and some good. So we want to be able to talk about some of what we've learned here. But for those who haven't seen, the main kind of although we have this hearing, we sent a letter yesterday, a 22-page letter to the committee, just outlining everything that we've learned. We wanted to have a record that members could work from to see just the nuts and bolts, the tick-tock of the retaliation against Marcus's case, which we've learned the most about. And so you can find that letter, right there on Empower's home screen of our Twitter feed. And yeah, we tried to put a lot in there. But in a minute, I want to turn to Garrett and to Marcus to get just I want to hear what they learn new, because what many of you may not realize is that, as we learn information from some different clients, we're not always directly sharing that with other clients. So some of the information there is new for them. But Jason, anything you want to add about up top before we dive into that?
No, just, like I said, like you said, we're going to be just basically previewing some of the new information that we've learned since Garrett and Marcus's odysseys began, and we have learned quite a bit. It is, and hopefully this hearing next week will be an opportunity to, on the one hand, take a bit of a victory lap and show that that sometimes there are things that can be remedied through the system, like like we were able to do for Marcus and getting his clearance back. But there's also people like Garrett who are still out there, who haven't had a remedy yet, and who still, we're going to need major legislative reform as well as better oversight for things to be cured. And hopefully the hearing next week will be an opportunity to help people put pressure on members to do that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Well, so let's dive into the letter. And so let's start with you, Marcus. Was there anything in the letter that was new to you that you had not been aware of before reading it?
Yeah, I guess the thing that stuck out to me the most filing through the letter was just on page 11, where it just talked about the DAD Veltri making open comments that were pretty much straight out religious discrimination, which is enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution. So that just kind of struck me that, an executive would be that bold to put forth that, someone strongly held religious belief would be a reason to revoke their security clearance. I thought that was pretty stunning, to be frank. Um, a lot of the other things that have been portrayed in here are things that, I could have inferred, but it's a bit striking to see it on paper, um, where they were waiting for, a certain counsel to leave the office before, generating documents to suspend clearances and that sort of thing. Um, and then just the characterization of certain news outlets as, more or less trustworthy. Um, I mean, those are the things that kind of stuck out to me, with the religious discrimination piece, the characterization of, news outlets being, you know alt right or something to that effect, but then in FBI systems itself, they're circulating, the literal sources of information. Um, so it's just kind of striking where you see this conduct from these executives, and there's no real check or balance, for what's occurred, other than whistleblowers speaking up and speaking out at great cost to themselves and their families, and future employment.
Yeah. We should highlight kind of up top here, something I didn't mention before, which is, of course, the world was introduced to Jeff Feltry a few days ago, because he's the one that led the first press conference on the second Trump assassination attempt. He's the special agent in charge of the FBI's Miami field office, the fifth biggest FBI field office in the country, and someone who, as our letter shows, has major political biases against conservatives, specifically, no doubt, against Trump. And just in general, though, also, like, anyone that again, that was hesitant about an unproven new vaccine, anyone with faith, all these biases are just so clear from all these documents. And so it's that really makes this particularly germane right now, as they are leading that investigation. I had to laugh as I saw some of these documents, and some of these we've had for a long time, right? Some of them were in your security clearance file that was initially produced, but outlets like Real Clear Politics, real fringy there, according to the FBI's Insider Threat Office. But like you say, they're sending them out. The FBI is in their own daily news briefs or whatever. It just was so ludicrous, so silly.
Well, I mean, we have long been critical of the entire sort of notion of the way that insider threat, this whole sort of concept of creating an office specifically to look at insider, to quote unquote insider threats. There's no real accepted methodology for how to do that, and often the things that they try to use as proxies to identify quote unquote insider threats tend to overlap with, people who might be whistleblowers. And so, there have been major problems with that. I mean, for years, from the entire outset of the office. And this just shows the sort of the frivolous nature of, there's no rigor, there's no objective standards. It's just somebody in the insider thinks that, somebody who reads Real Clear publications is somehow automatically an insider threat because of that. It's just, I mean, it's absurd.
I remember when they first put out their on there a list, right? The Insider Threat Office was started in the mid 2010s, but I remember this list they put out early on. It was when you and I were still working together for Grassley, Jason, and the list was like people who, work late at their desk late at night, or are I'm trying to remember. Some of them were just so funny, right? Because you look at that and you're like, oh, this sounds a lot like a whistleblower. Like that, I think what you're describing okay, of course there are insider threats out there, right? And those need to be rooted out. But what you've just described is the profile of a whistleblower as well. So y'all better figure out how to differentiate between the two here.
Yeah, I can't remember the details either, but it was things like, people who are independently. It was absurd.
Can think independently. People who are not slaves. Yeah. It was ridiculous. So Garrett, what about you? Anything in the letter that was new for you as you read it for the first time?
Yeah, there were a few things, but one other piece on the insider threat and whistleblower issue is after all of us had been suspended, like the following year, because every year you have to do annual whistleblower training and insider threat training. So in 2023, I think it was, they combined that training, at least at the FBI, and then that was leaked, or that came out publicly. I think Uncover DC did a story on that, and Kyle or Steve got that from somebody inside the FBI, and there was, the small number of FBI employees who still will speak to any of us were like, yeah, there's outrage about this, because it's clear that they're trying to target, people like you guys who, they'll label us all insider threats. But one of the things that stood out, I guess, kind of ties into that for me, that was new, was you guys wrote in the letter that sometime in the summer of 2022, SIIS opened its investigation into me. And then, according to new whistleblower information, the CIU investigator assigned to my case reported to Sean Clark and disclosed to his chain of command that he believed the timeline of events suggested that rather than leaking to Project Veritas, I may have been a whistleblower to the Weaponization Committee. And then the CIU investigator reportedly clarified to Dina Perkins that there was no evidence that I had leaked to the media, which, of course, September 26th of 2022, when they tried to trap me when I reported to my new unit, like, I knew that was a trap right at the outset, because they started asking me questions about things that I had disclosed to Congress, but were accusing that I leaked them to the media. And I just, this last piece, it doesn't shock me, but of course, Dina Perkins responded that she had already briefed the FBI's 7th floor that S.A. O'Boyle was a media leaker and did not want to correct this misunderstanding. And it's like, well, that's not a misunderstanding. That's you just blatantly retaliating against a whistleblower. And, finally it's coming out that my belief from the very beginning was true. And, a lot of people probably don't know this, but I met Jason in person that day. And looking back on it seems pretty clear to me that the FBI was surveilling me while I was in that part of Virginia, and following me around that day, and
That
probably
that day being the day your clearance was suspended.
correct. Yeah, September 26th of 2022. And it
I'm
just,
not sure. I knew you met early on, but I'm not sure I had realized it was that precise day.
yeah,
That's pretty
yeah,
remarkable.
I know it was, because when I got walked out, I contacted Jim Jordan's office, and I was like, "Hey, I just got suspended," and they put me in touch with Jason, and then we met later that evening. And but yeah, and then some of the other stuff that stood out was just how, like, on some of the same days, they were doing things in Marcus's case and my case, and it just is. I mean, I remember telling Jason that night something to the effect of, like, "I know this was intentional." And it's like, well, okay, how do you know that? And I didn't have concrete proof, or I didn't have receipts at the time. But now, after 2 years, to start seeing some of this stuff come out, there is some vindication there. I know we have a long way to go in my case, but um, it's ratifying to me to be like, okay, they can gaslight me all they want and try to point to me as the bad guy all they want, and subpoena records of mine and my wife's all they want, and they're still wrong.
So just to explain a little bit of context for people who may not understand the importance of the distinction that you made there, Garrett, what you said, that they, when they confronted you that day, they accused you of leaking to the press information that you had not leaked to the press, but information that you had made disclosures to Congress about. Just so people understand why that distinction is important. If you laws for FBI employees are different than the whistleblower laws for all other federal employees. They're weaker. And one of the way, in many ways, but in one of the ways in which they're weaker is that disclosures for FBI employees, have to go to certain specific audiences. In the Whistleblower Protection Act that applies to most of the rest of the federal employees, it doesn't matter who you give it to. So you can make a protected disclosure to a journalist, but you can't make a protected disclosure to a journalist for if you're an FBI employee. There are specific people, and only specific people, that you can tell, like the inspector general, one of your supervisors, or Congress. And Garrett had made protected disclosures to the right audience, to an that he should have been protected for making them to. But that was the whole point of their investigation, was to try to pin a type of disclosure on him that he couldn't be protected for, so that they could retaliate against him. And then they just asserted that that was true and used that as the basis for the security clearance revocation, suspension and revocation. And the problem is that we're learning, and that, you know, this is what Congress needs to understand that they need to fix, is there's just absolutely no due process afforded to FBI employees when it comes to security clearances. And that's why they use it as a method of retaliation. They use it because they know that there's no meaningful oversight of it.
Right. And that, some people may know this too, but early on, it was like, I don't know, early October maybe, or mid-October of 2022. I was going through the early stages of trying to appeal it, and all those appeal processes are internal to the FBI. And one of them, it was with AD Michael Schneider and a bunch of his minions. We hop on this call and they all list their name and their title, and pretty much right out of the gates, he says, "We're not going to be addressing any of the merits as to why you're being suspended. We're just going to address whether we went through the proper internal procedures to suspend you." And then when I had my turn to speak, I was like, "Well, if we're not going to address the merits, what's the point?" And the whole point is the retaliation is they've created this carve out with the security clearance that they can just come up with any flimsy reason to suspend people. Like Marcus mentioned about our religious freedoms and our First Amendment rights. And then they're going to use that and say, "Oh, this person's an insider threat, or they're hostile towards the government because of what?" They don't have an objective standard. They can just throw whatever they want at the wall and see what sticks, or make it stick on their own, and then strip a clearance. And then, you know, in Marcus's case, 27 months for some resolution. And even that, you guys aren't even all the way there yet, because the FBI hasn't come good on their part of the agreement. And then, my case, we're a few days away from 2 years, and it's looking more and more like it's just pure retaliation in all of these instances. And then another piece that stood out to me, though, with the letter, especially because of Jeffrey Veltri being back in the news because of the assassination attempt on Trump in Florida. This guy, he, instead of getting punished, so he's under investigation. That was news to me. He was under investigation for retaliation already, and then they kind of postponed his promotion, and then they end up promoting him again anyways to one of the most prestigious field offices in the country. And it's like, not only should this guy not be in charge of anyone, he shouldn't even be in the FBI, because he's clearly so biased and has so much animus towards people who have a faith tradition, people who have different ideas or thoughts than he has. I see Carrie Pickett is in the space. Back in November of 2023, she did that story about Veltri's social media posts that high-ranking officials who are also involved in the whistleblower retaliation, like Jennifer Moore, she was an AD at the time, they all basically coached him to scrub his social media before appointing him to this new high-ranking position. And it's like, this is, for us, we're paying attention, and so we're following all this and seeing it. But for a lot of people, it's new information, and it's just so crazy that the FBI, who claims integrity as a staunch cornerstone of their bureaucracy, is lacking so much integrity when it comes to the facts.
Yeah, Marcus, one of the things that will be that I've been looking forward to for a while is this hearing with you next week, because as Jason mentioned at the outset, it's a chance for a little bit of a victory lap. Again, we are still working through the pay issues, and they darn well better get that pay worked out. I will say, given when I was on the Merit Systems Protection Board, I guess even before that, when I was their general counsel, certain agencies, even after there were rulings to give pay or other things, there were troubles with that at times. So I'm waiting to see our way through that, right? But yeah, how does it feel for you to anticipate going back to the weaponization committee again? The last time we were there, it was stated that all three of you were security threats to our nation, and now you're going back with your clearance reinstated.
Yeah, it's gonna be it'll be interesting to go back up on the hill. I'm really interested to see what the IG has to say, because I mean, frankly, this letter that you guys just produced, I mean, it's pretty shocking on its own. So, part of my thought process is like, okay, the letter's pretty shocking. There are some things that I thought was going on, but it's pretty interesting to actually see it in print. Um, so I'm like, okay, this is what's been released right now. Like, you know, what more is the IG going to actually, potentially say on Wednesday? Because all this information here on its own is pretty stunning. And, like Garrett pointed out, it's interesting to see Mr. Veltri and the role he played in all these, corrupt actions. And then he's seemingly promoted to this field office in South Florida, to oversee one of the largest field offices in the Bureau. That internally within the Bureau is coveted to a certain extent. So it seems like his conduct is, approved by FBI leadership as, being good to go for, the vision and the direction they want to take their organization. And it's also the other striking thing here is you see the power that these executives can wield, and then the fear that they then try to instill in any subordinates. I mean, in the letter, you highlight multiple times where there are subordinate investigators who don't agree with the revocation of clearances or say there's no issue, but the executives, Veltri or Perkins, are pushing for revocations, or like Garrett called out, it's already been briefed a certain way and we're not going back on that. So, like, where are the checks and balances on out of control, executives within the organization? That's the particularly alarming piece, because that poses, ironically enough, insider threat. That type of conduct on its own poses the insider threat if you're essentially purging your ranks, seemingly trying to achieve some kind of ideological purity, or agency orthodoxy. Um, just really looking forward to coming up there on Wednesday, seeing what the IG has to present, talking to the committee, and just getting all this information out for the American public to see what type of corruption is occurring within an institution that's supposed to be, securing their national security. And it seems like you have executives willy-nilly wielding security clearances as a weapon against anybody who would speak up or, speak out about things going on that may be corrupt within the outfit.
Yeah, it should be
Yeah.
interesting. Last time you were there, you were there as as someone whose clearance had been suspended, and now you're going to be sitting there with a fully restored clearance, which is sort of, I mean, it is the FBI admitting that they were wrong, right? They technically didn't admit in the agreement that they signed that they did it for retaliatory purposes. They didn't admit to any wrongdoing, but agreeing to pay you, all your back pay, and agreeing and having restored your clearance in response to our appeal. I mean, those are admissions of wrongdoing. Essentially, they, by their actions, they have admitted the wrongdoing.
Right.
Well, and what will be great about this hearing is you'll have Inspector General Horowitz there. Obviously, I don't know exactly what he'll say, but it is clear now, having other whistleblowers from within SecD, that over time a lot of information has been provided to the DOJ IG. So they attempted to help one of our other clients switch to another job when she was retaliated against. In fact, the adjudicator on your case, Marcus, it sounds like the initial investigator on your case may have filed either an IG or an OPR complaint of some sort against Veltri. It sounds like that's what the underlying investigation into him was that delayed the announcement, FBI leadership's announcement of him as sacked for about 5 months. So again, we have Horowitz, and again, I think he'll have a lot of good insights to share. But I do want to kind of take this quick second to point out. I know there's kind of a moment right now about everybody criticizing kind of strongly worded letters, and maybe there's a difference between those coming from Congress or coming from an organization like Empower, but it really was just because of people coming forward and us trying to make the case, obviously, that that the FBI did budge to the extent that it did. So that adjudicator on your case was persuaded by the appeal that we wrote. And so it does make me sad whenever we write anything or put anything out and everyone says, nothing will happen, right? Because you have to assemble the facts, you have to tell the story. And to your point, that the hearing is a chance to tell the American people, that is sometimes how things change. It's just by marshaling all the facts, telling the story in a coherent way, and giving people an opportunity to understand why there needs to be changes, which in this case requires change to the law, in my view.
Yeah, and it's it hasn't gotten, I don't think it's gotten enough attention, but it's really extraordinary and almost surreal to think about. Actually, think back to last year when you guys were testifying up there. If someone had told you, oh yeah, a year now you're going to be coming, Marcus is going to have his clearance back, and oh, by the way, you're going to be representing several of the people in the security division, who objected at the time, and I mean, it's just crazy.
And were in turn retaliated against.
And then themselves were retaliated against, and you're going to be representing them, trying to get their clearances back or to get them some kind of remedy for the retaliation that they suffered for standing up internally and saying what you're doing to Marcus, what you're doing to Garrett is wrong. I mean, that's really extraordinary that we have people coming to us, who read our appeal on Marcus's behalf and were persuaded by it, or even before they read our appeal, they were internally objecting to what was going on. I mean, one of the new things in the letter is, of course, that, as Garrett said earlier, he suspected that the whole thing about the timing of his suspension versus his transfer was all addictive, that was on purpose to make it as painful as possible. He suspected that. He had strong reason to suspect that. But I mean, we know that now. We know that from other whistleblowers, that people objected internally and said, no, this is wrong. This is vindictive. And they were told to basically shut up and color. This guy, F this guy. We're gonna screw Garrett to the wall, and there's nothing you can do about
it. Yeah. Daylight's a pretty good disinfectant. Obviously we wouldn't have things like, the Kelly cart. It says on page 10, it says 2 CIU contractors who use the so-called, quote, Trump questionnaire often said they were fearful of being fired by Section Chief Perkins, and talked about the Kelly cart coming for them. And the Kelly cart was a reference to a female contractor who, after pushing back against the Section Chief's wishes, had an employee show up at her desk with a cart to box up all of her personal belongings. And then she was walked out of the building and her employment was terminated. I mean, that's a pretty strong message, sent to your subordinates. And it obviously is going to create a chilling effect where people know, if I speak up or speak out against what's going on, I'm going to suffer consequences for it. I mean, talk about a poisonous work environment.
Yeah, the Kelly cart was actually what inspired this letter, believe it or not, because some of the other things in there that were newer we didn't have at the time, but that Kelly cart anecdote is so striking, right? And again, these are the individuals. Chris Wray testified before judiciary several weeks ago that questionnaire, it was not a pre-printed, right? They did it just for the particular interviews. They used it for 3 different ones, but it wasn't like a standard form or anything. But we know those same types of questions were being asked in other interviews. That was the whole thrust. Every one of the the 302s from your case and others talked about your view on the vaccine. On our other one of our other clients, someone was just asking me earlier today about the quote in there where it says he's a gun nut, right? These were all out there. But for Ray to say, oh, this was just a contractor, which, by the way, virtually everybody who works in those units are, all the line level folks, and then to suggest that they were just kind of rogue in some way, when in fact they were just trying to follow, they were trying to stay out of the crosshairs and do what they understood that the leadership of that of SecD expected. So I just, again, that was a very striking anecdote.
Well, and the reason that you had people at the line level asking those kinds of inappropriate questions in witness interviews, in security probes, is because that was signaled to them by the leadership of the security division. Those are the issues, the COVID COVID vaccine hesitancy or what, any kind of opposition or not going along with that, and any kind of Trump support or anything that even hinted at, not being, quote, on the program with regard to the J6 and how they were handling that. So, I mean, those were the key issues. And so that's obviously what, that signal was sent to the top. They didn't have to write, you don't have to have the head of the security division send out a memo that says, I want you to ask everybody whether they support Trump. I want you to ask everybody whether they take the vaccine. You don't have to do that when in every meeting you're asking the questions. What's this guy's vaccine status? Is there, is he a Trump guy? Right. You don't have to document that in a directive. The people below you will get the message and they will ask those questions because they know that's what their bosses want to hear about.
Well, and again, it's not just Sec D, right? As a different whistleblower to us last summer highlighted, right? It came from Deputy Director Abate, Paul Abate, right at the outset when he became Deputy Director, put out this, what someone described as a chilling threat, saying, if you have a problem with the way we're handling these things, you don't belong in the FBI. And special agents in charge, if you have someone that's questioning these things, you have them come talk to me. And again, the message came from the very, very top. Carrie, you had a question. We've added you on as a speaker here, so I want to give you the chance to ask.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Not necessarily a question, but it's important to point out, first off, that you guys, Tristan and Jason, you guys have been on top of the whistleblower, the FBI whistleblower stuff, as you very well alluded to, for many, many years over in Grassley's office, as I've been watching you guys. And particularly, I've been looking at it since at least 2016. With the FBI whistleblower, I think it was Enhancement Protection Act. I know I'm sort of
Protection Enhancement Act.
Yes, exactly.
The signed version of that is sitting up next to me up on the wall in my office, even though it was a rump bill that we couldn't get across hardly any of the things we wanted to.
That's right. I started looking at the issue of FBI whistleblowers about 8 years ago. So just to let you know that, all three of us have been, looking at this issue for many years. This isn't something that we just sort of jumped onto, as all these issues have been coming to the forefront in, many people's lives. That being said, the interesting thing here is that what you have are that the brass, what they wanted to do with FBI personnel. We're not talking about the senior executive service, but we're talking about like the brick agents. Right? We're talking about the rank and file here. They've wanted to keep them clueless as to how to do whistleblowing. Okay, so before FBI rank and file were able to go directly to Congress, they pretty much said, no, you guys have to go through this really draconian way of whistleblowing. And you have to go through this like horrible bureaucratic way of whistleblowing. And when you whistleblow, we're going to know about it. And we're probably going to end up retaliating against you. And if you end up going directly to Congress, well, that's going to be essentially a violation. But after this law was passed, ultimately, they were able to go directly to Congress. But here's the catch. The majority of FBI personnel didn't know that they could go directly to Congress. They were completely clueless about it. And therein lies the problem. The thing is that the FBI brass don't want FBI whistleblowers going directly to Congress and telling them what's going on in their business. And that is something that I have found very often, because I have found some of the toughest FBI guys like completely scared to ever talk, because very often they end up saying, look, if I talk, then what ends up happening is they will bankrupt me. They will go after my family. They will go after my bank account, and I'm going to be out in the streets. And they have been doing this for years. Now, why is this? This is because of all the whistleblower cases that end up going on over at the FBI, like a fraction end up being successful. And that's what they count on very often.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And it's, there are still so many more legislative changes to make to the law, and because the deck is stacked against FBI whistleblowers from the outset, and it's been that way since the modern whistleblower protections were adopted in 1978. The FBI was excluded. Again, I always blame just the legacy, the specter of J. Edgar Hoover, and all the power that he still had. I mean, he was gone, right? But just the extent to which members of Congress, feared the FBI. Obviously, it had also just a among some a very good and strong reputation, and for a number of reasons. But it was such a mistake to carve them out of the whistleblower protections.
Yeah.
Well, and even the modest legislative reforms that that Tristan and I have been involved with over the years, I don't think it's difficult to explain to the public sort of even how hard it was just to get those sort of common sense changes, right? Like, so for example, until fairly recent history, FBI agents weren't even protected for going to anyone in their chain of command to report wrongdoing other than the SAC of their office. And
that was the 2016 law. That was the protection enhancement.
Yeah, and there was a whistleblower case that I worked on years ago with Mike German, who he described, well, you can't just go talk to the SAC, right? He actually made his protected disclosures to the assistant special agent in charge, the ASAC. And, the IG ended up coming back and saying, well, that wasn't protected because you didn't go to the right person. And he's like, well, how am I supposed to go to the SAC? I ask for a meeting with the SAC, and what's going to happen? I get a call from the ASAC. Why do you want to talk to the SAC? And then I tell the SAC why I want to talk. I tell the ASAC why I want to talk to the SAC, and boom, now I don't have a protected disclosure, and they can retaliate against me.
Exactly.
So yeah, you're exactly right. The system is designed to trip people up. It's designed to be, it's overly complex. And when we're pushing on that, and the other change, the explicit reference that was put into the statute around the same time that allowed them to go to Congress. I mean, I remember being in the room trying to beat back the FBI's resistance and like negotiating with their HR people about the language and about that, the specifically the part that referenced Congress. And we ended up doing it with a cross reference to another section of statute, so it doesn't actually say the words Congress in there. It says consistent with 7211, which is another another statute that references employees' rights to talk to Congress. And I remember when we proposed that as like a reasonable compromise between their position and ours, this sort of defeated look on the FBI HR guy's face, like, well, this is already law. How can we object to it? Just referencing the other part of the statute.
Exactly. And think about this, Jason. You guys put that in there years ago. It's only recently that FBI personnel found out, oh, you mean we can report to Congress? Yeah, you can. But they didn't know that up until recently.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and that's where, again, things like hearings or other things, right? Again, what tools there are to affect change, one could talk about for a long time, but a lot of it is just educating the workforce, right? Letting them know these are your rights, and being able to talk about that is significant.
That's
Garrett,
right. And
go ahead, Gary.
But then, even though they were reporting to a Congress, what did they do? They ended up retaliating. But every time they retaliated, they ended up putting themselves into worse situations, such as Jeffrey Veltri, such as Dina Perkins, as well as it was also Jennifer Mords. Some of them just got kind of, shall we say, retired out. But
well, at some point they also figured out the loophole of using the security clearance as the way to retaliate.
Okay.
And I'm not sure when they figured that out, but they used to use other methods. And this is sort of the history of how this happens. Like they find some administrative or bureaucratic loophole, and that seems to be the go-to. And like, okay, this is how we get the whistleblowers. A long time ago, it used to be fitness for duty reviews, where they would basically accuse you of being crazy, right, and make you go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist.
Oh yes, That's how they. That's how they get the military guys. By the way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just and then when there's enough oversight and scrutiny on that from Congress or the IGs, and there's a couple of bad examples, then they sort of move on to they find something else. And the thing that they're on now is using security clearances.
Yeah,
exactly.
Marcus and Garrett, I want to make sure we pull you back into the conversation here, but as from your perspective, given the potential legislative changes, I mean, it's hard to see the impact that the positive impact that could have been if there were stronger laws. But I don't know. Share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, for me, well, one of the things that Carrie touched on, I think is important to highlight again, is it was one of the last protected disclosures I made. So at the end of August or early September of 2022, the entire FBI workforce received 3 emails on the same day. 2 of them were from the DOJ, like the Attorney General or his office, and they were all about contacting Congress, right? And so I think FBI employees were starting to catch on, like, oh, I'm legally protected to go to Congress because 5 USC 7211, employees' right to petition Congress, tells you that you can. And then even in our annual whistleblower training that we'd get, it would say Congress was one of the I forget the exact terminology, but like one of the legal mechanisms an employee can go to provide protected disclosures. And at this time, in 2021, 2022, a number of FBI whistleblowers were going to Congress, and so we get all these emails, and they had these new memorandums in them that basically were saying you can't go talk to Congress unless you go through like a certain like Office of Congressional Affairs that the FBI has. And it's like, whoa, wait a second, you're trying to undercut the legal protections we already have. And then, of course, as they love to note, they had this caveat, and it says, and I'm quoting now, it says, and as JM 1-8.800 makes clear, nothing in these policies is intended to conflict with or limit whistleblower protections such as provided in 5 USC 2302 and applicable regulations. Yeah, sure. Like anybody reading that, and as when I
well,
made
the reason, Garrett, the reason that is in there is because of a rider on all appropriations bills that Senator Grassley has put into place, which was then eventually codified in statute, that basically says if you're anything that's close to anything that's like a gag order or a gag agreement, anything where you're telling people they can't talk, it has to include that specific language, right?
Well, this actually isn't that language. This is just in there. So believe, and I think Senator Grass's office wrote a letter to Garland about that memo. I'm pulling it up right now, right? But it does not have.
Oh, it was similar, but it wasn't precise.
Yeah. Well, It wasn't nearly as detailed, right? That's far more detailed. It's like a full paragraph that the writer requires. And for other agencies than the FBI, again, if the FBI didn't have its own carve-out statute, then and they were subject to the same laws as all the other normal civilian agencies, then it's also a prohibited personnel practice that OSC can investigate to try and enforce something like that.
Right, and that's one of the problems with the rider is exactly. So the FBI took the position when it got codified for people other than FBI employees that requirement didn't apply to them anymore. And I think there was maybe 1 year where the rider fell out and it wasn't in the appropriations bill. And then when people realized that the FBI was saying, oh, okay, so we don't have to comply with this anymore, that was their official position, then the rider got put back. But even then, it's so difficult to actually enforce that, right? I mean, you think, okay, well, Congress has said you can't spend money, to enforce anything like this, and yet they still put it in there, and it's still scary. And one of the things we learned in Steve Friend's case was that routinely the inspections division at the FBI tells people when it opens up an inquiry on them, you are not allowed to talk to anybody about the fact that we have opened an inquiry on you. It's like, well, they don't have the authority to do that unless they have the statutorily required language in there. They're not supposed to be spending any money to do, that on anything that tries to gag people that way and prevent them from talking to folks. And there was a non-compliant gag order against Steve Friend. How many more are there? It's one of the things we've raised with the Inspector General, right? Like, you guys need to go and calculate how much money that is not authorized for appropriation is the FBI spending on these illegal gag orders to shut people up.
Yeah, they did that to me too. The day I got suspended, they told me you can't tell anybody about this. And I'm thinking, yeah, I can. I mean, implicitly with my First Amendment rights, which you still have as a government employee, And I would say, especially as a suspended one, like, what do you mean I can't tell anybody? I can't go tell a lawyer. I can't go make another protected disclosure to Congress. I can't tell my wife. And that's exactly what they're trying to do, is get you to not tell anyone. And it's like, you know, I love how the FBI says one of their, one of their, main priorities is rigorous obedience to the Constitution. And it's like, you pretty much violate that of your own employees. So if you're going to violate your employees' constitutional rights, whose constitutional rights aren't you willing to violate?
And one of the things that Marcus had mentioned earlier was just the definition of that, right? And so I one of the things we included in the letter was when Jennifer Moore, who's kind of the top, at one point she was the top official over all this stuff, so she reported directly to the deputy director, and so she's the one that Congress originally had come up to be interviewed, and now we've learned kind of the whole chain of command down from her. But they asked her, what is conspiratorial views? That's what it said in Marcus's suspension letter. She says, well, it's views opposite the United States Constitution. I said, well, who determines, who defines what's a conspiratorial view or opposite the Constitution? She says, well, it's what's in conflict with the Constitution and the law. It defines what's conspiratorial. And there's just such blinders, this idea that, well, anyone that has a different view than I do, doesn't believe in this. Or, Veltri to say, anyone that said that they had maybe questions about the integrity of the 2020 election and wanted to see more evidence come out, right? That they said, oh, no, that's someone, they're not entitled to security clearance. That's not someone who believes in the Constitution, is how he put it.
Right. I mean, I think off of what Garrett was saying, like, the internal stuff. I think there used to be an internal byline that would go out on email sometimes that would say, do the right thing in the right way or something to that effect. And, I remember talking to folks there, like, what does that even mean? Like, do they mean like truth, justice, and righteousness? Like, if it's that, then like, sure, fine. But it's kind of funny. All these things have happened. It's like, do they even still send that byline out anymore? Like, do the right things in the right way? Like, what does that mean? And then just, the unconstitutional conduct. I mean, you have the paragraph here where it's talking about uh, contractors also asked whether they were aware that one of the individuals being investigated attended a Second Amendment advocacy day. Like, how is that illegal? So in this letter you have outlined, it's like, okay, you're going after seemingly First Amendment protected activity, and now there's a problem with somebody going to advocate for the Second Amendment. And people say, for our country, the First Amendment is the bedrock, and then the Second Amendment is the failsafe. So the letter is really problematic in highlighting that here are bedrock constitutional principles that it seems like FBI executive management has a problem with, and who's going to hold them to account for what they've done.
Yeah, that's something I'd like to bring up. I've been married to the FBI for 10 years now, and I'm dumbfounded. What happened to Garrett and Marcus is just, it's criminal. I mean, just plain criminal. But as someone from the kind of the outside looking in, I see four areas that just basically the reasons why the FBI is failing so badly in protecting employees. First off, is a lack of oversight. I mean, when I provided executive oversight to offices across the country, LA, Miami, etc., I would spend more time in the office on site in 1 month than what typically FBI executives do in a 5 or 10 year period. I think the second thing is just a lack of personal integrity within members of the SES and executives at the FBI. I mean, I am dumbfounded that someone would think that they could talk about a religious view as a reason for suspending someone. Who with any type of ethics would do that? And then I think the third
And that's the
thing,
same person who wanted to suspend someone's clearance because he believed that that person didn't believe in the Constitution.
right? And then third, just a lack of accountability. So you have someone who is under investigation and you transfer them, or you allow them to retire and then you bring them back in a in a contract position. I mean, I am just dumbfounded that that would happen. I mean, again, all of these three go together, and then the fourth, which kind of is the hammer, is the fear within the bureau of employees that are afraid to speak up. I would guarantee you that out of if there's a whistleblower, there are 10 or 20 more who should be blowing the whistle on misuse of funds, corruption, misconduct, etc. So, to me, as someone just, I've been married to the FBI for 10 years, I am just dumbfounded that this goes on and has been allowed to go on. What happened? I mean, Garrett and Marcus are heroes. They're the ones who are speaking the truth and saying, wait a minute, we have to operate with integrity, and they are putting their lives and their livelihoods at risk and their families at risk for speaking the truth. They're the heroes, they're the true leaders within the FBI.
Well, I certainly second that. And one thing I would note that is to me a silver lining in all of this. Yesterday, when I was just trying to do a highlight thread of our letter, I got to the end, and of course it's so super long, and I was just depressed by the end. I had no more. Just okay, we went through all this, and now we're still waiting for Marcus's pay, and Garrett's still suspended, right? But again, one silver lining is there were people within the security division who spoke up, right? Who did try to do the right thing, and that resulted, as our letter details, in the entire leadership of the clearance adjudication unit being decapitated, and other people were retaliated against. But even within the security division, there were people who saw something was wrong and spoke up about it. And going back to
And now
Carrier's
some of
reference,
them are our clients.
yeah, that's right.
And that's just incredible, really. If you step back and think about it, rewind to last year when you guys were testifying, that's incredible.
Yeah, that's a piece that stands out tremendously to me. Tristan and Jason, you guys probably know better than most that oftentimes I look at it as a glass half empty, well, probably even less than half empty. And that being said, there are still instances like this where it's remarkable. It's astounding to me that there are people, basically that deep into the belly of the beast who see what is done to Marcus or me or Steve or others or themselves eventually then, but they still say, this is wrong. I'm going to mention that it's wrong. I'm going to bring it forward that it's wrong. I would think that they had to know. They had to have known that they were going to be retaliated against, but they did it anyways because it was right. It was in accordance with the oath that we all took to the Constitution. And they weren't buying the gaslighting of, oh no, the boss says that this guy is actually anti-Constitution, when all the indicators point to people like us trying to uphold our oath as best as we can. And then like another thing too here, which is crazy, is the broader First Amendment issues still is like the compelled speech doctrine, right? Like it's supposed to prohibit the government from punishing people for our speech. And then it's also supposed to prohibit the government from punishing us for refusing to adhere to their approved messages. Yet that's a lot of the cornerstone of their argument is oh, they have conspiratorial views. Well, why? Because you said so, but the First Amendment gives me the protection to not adhere to what you say as the government. And as government employees, wouldn't the people want uh a broader palette to have different types of people looking at things from a different lens, and then trying to come to a conclusion and saying, hey, what's most constitutionally accurate here? And like as my time as an FBI agent, that's what I always tried to do. I mean, I got leads before that were a social media post or whatever it may have been that I may not have agreed with the particular message, but that doesn't mean that I go knock on your door and threaten you with the full might of the FBI behind me. It's just absurd. And then as a FBI employee to have quote unquote leadership retaliate in this way, and I guess that's what it boils down to for me is a leadership issue and a leadership failure, because a good leader should recognize not everybody's going to agree with me exactly 100% of the time on everything I say and do, and that's a good thing. That's what makes an organization or a team better, is that people are different and people have different ideas and bring different attributes and characteristics to the table.
That's true inclusion.
One of the things
Yeah, that's true inclusion and diversity. What you have with the fear factor within the FBI is basically all you're doing is encouraging groupthink, and that's dangerous. And if you've read any type of management book, Good to Great by Jim Collins, I mean, it's called confronting the brutal facts. That's how you make organizations better. And the FBI should want to be better, but instead they want everyone to think the same way.
Well, and that's particularly
One of the
problematic
things-
in Marcus's case, and he said so in his testimony last year. I mean, given that his job was to point out, from open sources, intelligence, narratives that were out there, what people believed, that was literally what he, if it's relevant to one of the cases that he's, supporting in his field office, that's literally what he's supposed to do. And that's exactly what they punished him for doing, was providing visibility and highlighting for his superiors and his colleagues, what people were saying out in various open sources from a broad, diverse range. And if you just groupthink is the end of any kind of effective intelligence gathering operation, right?
Correct.
I mean,
Correct.
if you're in groupthink, you're gonna ignore messages you don't like. Intel gathering and intel analysis has to be objective, and it has to look at
that's Intel
alternative
101.
points of view.
They taught us that at the Intel training center I went to in the Marine Corps. I mean, the first thing they told us was groupthink is the death knell of any analytical cadre. If you're not looking at all the perspectives, then you're cruising for a bruise, and pretty much like bad things are in your future because you're not going to be taking into account every perspective that's out there that can inform your decision maker. So yeah,
that's how you get surprised.
Groupthink is a death knell.
Something that I want to point out was that the number of the disclosures that I had access to, particularly with the with the guys who were former military or active military who may have been reserve, they were accused of being disloyal Americans or disloyal to the United States. And that was an interesting thing, because when I wrote up the piece a while back, that the FBI was sort of like looking to go after whether it was individuals who may have been Christians or didn't want to take the jab, but also had a military background. The FBI was specifically incensed about the military demo, and they said that is not true. We love our military. We have our boots to suits program, and they were very sensitive about that, especially because I think I did it around Veterans Day, et cetera, et cetera.
You did it right on Veterans Day, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it just happened to come out around that time. It was just coincidental. It really was. But I got to tell you, it was one of those things that it was like they just used that term disloyal, to America, or around the word disloyal. And I was talking to one of my sources about that, and they said, look, it's they like to like use that against guys who have a military background, because they want them to be loyal, not so much to the US, but loyal to the FBI, because it's all because the FBI's main concern is about their branding. They have this huge concern about their marketing. Look, we all grew up, looking at the FBI, at least when we were younger. It's like, oh my God, the FBI guy. Oh, Mulder and Scully and blah, 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 blah. It's this whole thing. And like they have a whole division that like deals with like TV and like movies and how the FBI is looked at. So this whole idea that if the FBI looks bad, and if you make them look bad, then you are disloyal. And so that was something that was particularly, made them angry, that like we would not pull back on that particular story. And I just want you to keep that in mind.
Yeah. So Robert, I think, has some questions, and we're coming up to the end of our hour, but I want to make sure that Robert or anybody else who has a question gets a chance.
Thanks, Jason. Real quick. And yeah, Garrett and Marcus, absolutely so proud of you guys. Keep going. God's on your side. Just keep going, and so is the Constitution. First and Fifth Amendment all the way. So keep it up. My questions here is, what is the Supreme Court's position on security clearances? Are they saying that this is a separation of powers issue and nothing could be done unless the Constitution is amended? Or are they saying Congress has to pass a law and be signed by the president, which that's maybe just as harder? And another thing is,
oh, go ahead, Bob. Sorry.
Okay, thanks for answering that. And then my last question is, has the Office of Inspector General even considered or started or finished a presidential policy number 19 investigation or not? I was lucky to get one of those. I hear they never happen, but thanks, guys, and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, the investigation that the OIG was doing for Marcus was, for shorthand, PPD 19 covers it, and so they were doing that, and that's one of the same basis. Basically, any clearance retaliation, PPD 19, and then another statute are the bases for which you try and you appeal to the IG. So they are conducting those. They were conducting for Marcus, and now again we'll hear next week what they found. And then again, one is ongoing for Garrett as well as for multiple of our other clients. So,
Tristan, you might want to just very briefly explain to people what the Supreme Court. So, he's referencing Navy versus Egan. Just sort of walk people very briefly through that.
Yeah. So when Congress created the Merit Systems Protection Board, one of the cases that came up through there dealt with security clearances, and the Merit Systems Protection Board, for the agencies that it has jurisdiction over, reviews personnel actions. So generally, if you're fired or demoted, or if you're retaliated against, those are all areas that MSPB has jurisdiction. Of course, as we mentioned earlier, the FBI was excluded from that. But even for all other employees, a security clearance and denying one or revoking one has a significant impact on someone's ability to work. And so that was appealed up to, I think, not in a whistleblower case, but just appealed up to MSPB in a particular case. And ultimately, the Supreme Court held that Congress didn't explicitly enough make clear that MSPB had jurisdiction over those as personnel actions. So that carved it out from MSPB. And there was a subsequent legislative effort to try and get it changed in 1994. And the compromise that was settled on language talking about any significant change in working conditions went through. That was compromise language to try and get at clearances. And even still, none of the adjudicating bodies recognize that. So basically, Congress just has to pass a law saying they're overturning Navy versus Egan if they want to give any other agency, if they want to give MSPB the ability to review the clearances, and same for OSC, clearance determinations as being retaliatory. I know that was super down in the weeds. Normally I have to take a minute to think to translate my legalese into normal language. So hopefully that was helpful, though, because I didn't take the minute.
Well, the bottom line is right now there's no real outside authority that can second guess a security clearance determination. And that's essentially the courts are not willing, and because of Navy versus Egan, the courts and the MSPB, they don't want to touch a case that has to do with a security clearance because they see that as national security. We can't second guess the executive branch on what national security. We're not going to make that decision for them. We're going to be deferential to national security decisions, and that's generally makes sense and is generally true. But I think if you had sort of it depends on the facts of the case, right? Well, I mean, what if you had an agency that was summarily denying, or as a pattern in practice, denying security clearances to African Americans? Well, I mean, there is you're not. It's one thing to say we're not going to second guess the executive branch's national security decision. It's another thing to say, well, wait a minute, but if we have evidence that they're doing it for an improper purpose, why shouldn't that be able to be reviewed by an independent executive branch agency or subject to congressional oversight?
Right. Okay, Sean, you've had your hand up there. You're going to be our last question, and we'll end after that.
All right, appreciate it. And I really appreciate your guys' service and what you continue to do. This may seem a little long, but in the 90s, Janet Napolitano came out after the Ruby Ridge and the Waco incidents, and defined right wing extremism as people who stood up for the 10th Amendment, the 9th Amendment, people who were anti-abortion. And that paper then later was used by Eric Holder, who wrote a 16-page white paper. And I don't know if any of you guys remember any of this stuff or have any insight on it, but he used that, what Janet Napolitano was saying, to formulate his 16-page white paper to circumvent the due process clause we all have to target Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen. And I know we all have probably some not good feelings about Awlaki, but my question gets to, coming around to that, Title 18 of the U.S. Code, Section 242, goes over the deprivation of rights. And my question to you guys is, why isn't something like this being brought up? Because I do believe that your rights have been deprived, and this is violating our laws. And so I wanted to get your feelings on that. Maybe there's a little more legalese that I don't know about, but I think this is something that needs to be brought up. And I want to thank you guys for having this space. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sean. I think first off, I think Janet Reno, right, in the '90s, not Napolitano, as Holder's predecessor as AG there, and but I think the key thing is that the Civil Service Reform Act and its predecessors just made clear that those are that's where all the remedies are, such as they are, and they're not great in many instances, right? But so it's because it's an employment circumstance. It's not, the worst that happens is not someone being thrown in jail, say, right? It's someone losing their job. And that can be extremely painful when they suspend you for 27 months in the case of Marcus, or 22 months as in the case of Garrett. But that's why that statute, right? It's just the Civil Service Reform Act purports to, and all of the stuff for federal employees says, no, here's another set of laws, and this is what applies to federal employees in these circumstances. But again, the point about the abuse of those and all of those, still remains, and again, it's why the laws need to be strengthened for sure. So, Garrett or Marcus, any final words before we close here?
No, just thank you to everybody who listened, and thank you to Empower and Tristan and Jason and your team over there for continuing to try to expose all this evil coming from the FBI.
Thanks, Garrett.
Yeah, thank you. God bless you all. You're all in my prayers. Keep pushing forward. Keep up the fight.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks,
Thank
Marcus.
you for your very inspiring examples. Thanks everyone for joining us here. We're going to keep doing these each Friday. So we hope you'll tune in next time. And again, thank you so much to Marcus and to Garrett for joining us.